Hey guys, this is a tutorial video on mixing drums. In the past I've made videos that kind of showcase the flagship product from many different companies that make drum samplers and also make effects plugins, and show you how you can use those with Pro Tools to create drums and mix them. However, in this video I want to change things up a little bit. So rather than use the more expensive products on the market that cost a couple $100 just to purchase and use in Pro Tools, I wanted to change things up and show you how you can just use some pretty inexpensive software to create your drum performances in Pro Tools. So hopefully this is gives you some ideas if you're new to Pro Tools and you don't have a lot of experience using it, how you can mix drums. And it's also might be useful for people that don't want to spend a lot of money, hundreds of dollars, to buy extra software on top of already purchasing Pro Tools just to mix drums. But hopefully along the way I'll also show you some ideas about mixing for those of you that have more experience with Pro Tools, give you some new ideas, or even for people that are using more expensive software, maybe they'll pick up some things just using the stock plugins in Pro Tools, and how they can take that and apply it to their other plugins that they're using. So let's get started. So this is my Pro Tools session. I just have a single instrument track right now, a master fader, and then my talkback microphone. So this is an instrument track, and I'm going to be loading up Ezdrummer. I'm going to be using that as my drum sample player for this session. Alright. Now, Ezdrummer is from TuneTrack. It's pretty inexpensive. If you buy it on sale, I've seen it range from anywhere from like $30 up to about $100. It comes with a couple different kits, a couple different drum sets. You get different options for kick drums, snare drums, toms. Then you also have cymbals. And what happens is when you open it up, it loads just a stock kit into memory that then you can use to play back the samples. So while that's going on, I'll show you the other ones. You get a couple hi-hats, some crash cymbals, and 2 rides. I'm just going to use the one right off the bat to get started with it, that just comes when you first load it up. So this is like the instrument view of the software, and you can click on the instruments. You can hear them right here. There's also a mixer page that you can switch over to here if you haven't used it. And what this does is you can control the individual microphone tracks of the recording. So there are drum samples for like the kick drum, and I'll play these back and show you what you can do. And these are like the direct microphones that are placed inside the kick drum or just outside of it that just really pick up the kick drum. Then there's also ones for snares, hi-hats, toms, overheads, and then room. So that's the mixer, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, play around with it. So that's a mixer. There's also grooves, and it comes with I have a couple other libraries, but the ones that come with Ezdrummer are here, the Ezdrummer libraries for pop rock. I also have Superior Drummer, so those many libraries are showing up here. If you just buy Ezdrummer, all you're going to get is this MIDI library. And what I've done is if you click on these, you can click on the different ones, you get all these grooves, you can pick them out and demo them like this. What I've done is if you just drag and drop them into Pro Tools, you can create a MIDI performance like this, and I've already done that. It just is a loop. I'll play it back and you can hear. So here kind of like a verse section, just some hi-hat, snare, kick drum, a couple crash cymbals, building up to a fill, chorus part with a ride. So that's a drum performance. Nothing too difficult about doing it. You just pick the ones you like, drag and drop them into Pro Tools. So if you like this one, drag and drop it in there. Then it shows up. And I'm going to close it out and just highlight this one again. Alright, so let me go back. Here, I'm going to play it back, and let's look at the mixer. Using the mixer shows you which channels have signal going through by these lights, and you can solo it. So we got a kick drum, turn it up and down. There's our snare, snare top, snare bottom, hi-hat, toms, overheads, and that's a room. Alright, so that's really what you've got to work with. Now, with Ezdrummer, you know, if you want these microphones to be changed in volume or anything like that, you can do that with the mixer. However, what you don't have control over is if you want to EQ the individual channels, or you want to compress the individual channels, or any effects that you want to put on. You don't have that option inside of Ezdrummer if you want to do that. TuneTrack also has another software package called Superior Drummer, and it comes with effects that you can put on individual channels. So if that's something you want to do with the software, you know, you might want to check that out. However, what I'm going to show you next is how you can take these individual channels out of Ezdrummer and mix them as separate things inside of Pro Tools. So you can see down here on the output of the mixer, they're all going to track 1. Track 1 is what comes out here on the instrument track. So when I play it back, every single one of these channels was coming out on my instrument track. What I'm going to do here with Pro Tools is if I right click, click New, brings up the New Tracks page. On a stereo, I'm going to make auxiliary inputs. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to keep the toms as 1, 5, 6, 7 of them. Alright. 7 stereo aux tracks. Let me rename these. It's kick, snare top, snare bottom. Next to the hi-hat, toms, overhead, and room. Alright, now what you need to do inside of Ezdrummer is to, instead of being track 1, switch these now to separate ones. So track 2, track 3, track 4, 5, 6. Going to make all the toms going to 6. Overheads 7 and room 8. Alright, so now when I play it back, you'll see that none of the tracks are coming out here on the instrument. They're all coming out to these individual auxiliary tracks. After I set them up here. Alright, so that's cool. This is how you can then, you can work on these individually. So like if I play it back, you can solo them. Now you've got access to mixing. You can add in plugins over here. You can add synths, like to reverbs and stuff like that if that's what you want to do. All within inside of Pro Tools, and mix the individual tracks separately that you couldn't do with inside of Ezdrummer. Now you can do inside of Pro Tools. So that's cool. I've got that set up. However, one thing I know straight away is as far as my individual instruments go, like with my snare drum and my toms, I like to have a lot of room or ambient sound on those instruments. However, for my cymbals and my kick drum, I don't like to have a lot of ambience with those instruments. With Ezdrummer, you don't really have control over if you want the rooms to be quieter for the kick drum, for the snare. It's basically if you boost up the room or bring down the room, it does that kind of evenly across all the samples. It's true that this is similar to what it would be like if you recorded a drum set, an acoustic drum set in the studio. You don't really have access to, you'd have to use some mixing tricks like EQ and compression and stuff like that if you want to bring out the room or bring down the room for the individual instruments. However, with Ezdrummer, it's as simple, if you want to control the different levels, as creating a different Ezdrummer instrument inside of Pro Tools if you want to do that. So let me show you what I like to do with Ezdrummer, because I want to have a lot of room sound for my snare and toms, but I don't want a lot of room sound for my kick, my hi-hat, and cymbals. So what you can do, I'll switch back over so you can definitely see it over here, is you highlight this one, this track right here. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to duplicate it inside of Pro Tools. No problem. Alright, so I've got a duplicate. I'm going to bring it down here. Actually, perfect. I'm going to name this one Easy 2. Well, how about Easy Dry? And this one I'll name Easy Ambient. Cool. So if I switch back over here now, what I'm going to do is move the kick over here. It's going to be in the dry. Alright, and the hi-hat is also going to be over in the dry. What you have to set this up is in your first Ezdrummer right here. What I'm going to do is take off the hi-hat, take off the cymbals, take off the, right now I have the kick drum as well, take that one off. So now all you have is the instruments that have a lot of room. The other instruments aren't loaded in this version of Ezdrummer. Let me switch over to the other one now. And in this one, I want to take off the ones that I have room. Alright. Now what you have to watch out for is if I open up the mixer, alright, I have these going out to the individual tracks. So I want to set this kick up right here. If you look at in plugins, you have Ezdrummer Dry and Ezdrummer Ambient. So what I want to do is switch the kick drum now over to the Ezdrummer Dry. So now in the hi-hat over here as well, hi-hat's coming out on 5 from Ezdrummer Dry. Now when I play it back, alright, so what you want to also do is set up the overheads just the same as you did before. Overhead and room. 2 of them. Stereo. Overhead, dry. Overhead. Room from the dry. I'm naming it dry just to say that it's the instruments that I want to kind of keep a little bit dry. And you have to sign it here, coming out from Ezdrummer. Dry is the overhead and the room. So now you can keep the kick drum dry, the cymbals dry, but boost up the room. Make the relative level of the room and the top, or the relative level of the room mics for the snare and toms loud, but the level of the room sound of the cymbals is down. So that's just the kick drum and cymbals. All right, so that's just one trick. You know, if with Ezdrummer you like different levels of ambience going across the different instruments, if you just duplicate your instrument track and then assign the outputs separately, so by one is more your dry stuff, one is more your ambient stuff, assign the appropriate outputs. That's one way that you can get different sounds. Control the different levels separately. One other trick that I'm going to do is talk to you about layering samples. And that comes again back from duplicating. So let me duplicate this one again. Alright, I'll bring this one over here. You know, it's starting to get a little bit more complicated, so maybe I'll color these a little bit different. Color these maybe this green color. Alright, now this one I'm going to call layers. If you open up Ezdrummer, originally what I did is I just used the stock ones, like the felt beater and this one right here. Now what I'm going to do is actually layer on with it. Let me get it set up here. If I open up the mixer, just quickly get these going out to the track, you can hear the difference. So this snare is much lower in pitch than this one. Cool. So this one, the layer that I'm going to use is the damped one. I actually don't want to have any toms coming through. So what this is going to do is just add an extra layer to the snare, and the rest of all the other instruments are off. So I've turned them to none. All right, so if I open up my mixer, I'm going to assign this to 3, back to 3, 7, and 8. Then create some more auxiliary inputs. the snare layer, overhead layer, and room layer. All right. Go into my layers. I had the snare coming out on 3 and the overhead in the room. So now when I play it back, what I can do is mix in some more snare sound, but it's a different snare hit, and then what it'll do is kind of thicken up because it's a lower pitch compared to the higher pitch. So if I were to mute this one, take it out, you can hear how it sounds. That's just a single snare mixed back in there. So if you want to add just in a little bit extra reverb, you'll hear that all you're getting on this one is just that layer. That's all I've got going through, just that extra snare layer. Then you can mix it in and kind of change things up. What I'll do is now play around with the different ones. This one's not the damped one. And this is more the high-pitched one. Kind of like how those two snares go together. All right. You could also just as well go back to this first one. Instead of using this one, change it to the lower pitched one. So right now what I've got is a combination of a low pitched snare and a high pitched snare. It's really up to you to decide what sounds good together, but you can do these sorts of things by mixing and matching with multiple instances of Ezdrummer to layer these different sounds, kind of give it a little bit different character rather than the stock sounds that everybody uses when they just pull up Ezdrummer and hit play. If you're looking to just be a little bit creative, have your sounds be a little bit different, but you're still using Ezdrummer, layering, mixing and matching, also adding some control over the ambience for the kick drum and the cymbals, I think tightens up the kit for your drum performance. And then also looking at layering, you can control the room, if you want add some more reverb through a different snare sample, or tighten it up with adding extra close mics. those are some basic ideas. I haven't even started doing any mixing on it, and already I've added a lot of versatility to using just the Ezdrummer library. Um, Hopefully that gives you guys some ideas about that. Next, I want to talk about mixing some of these things. Now, TuneTrack with the Ezdrummer library, they already did some EQing. They already did some compression on the samples. So you don't have to do a whole lot. The samples are pretty much good to go out of the library. However, you can do some kinds of compression. You can do some EQ to kind of change up the sound a little bit, make it a little bit more unique. And I'm going to show you some ideas that I've got for EQing drums that hopefully make the drums sound a little more lively and punch in your mix more. So let me start out with the kick drum. I've got that again right here. Let me solo it and start working on it. The first thing I like to do is some compression. So I'm going to just be using the stock Digidesign compressor that comes with Pro Tools. I'm running Pro Tools 8. More recent versions of Pro Tools 9, 10, they have like the channel strip plugin and stuff like that. So if you want to use that, that's fine. But the general ideas apply across different plugins that I'm going to be talking about. So this is just the stock compressor. And a compressor, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is a dynamics plugin. It changes the volume of the sound that goes through it. And it can control the volume in some pretty cool ways that especially for something like drums, that you can shape the whole like envelope of the signal by using a compressor. So what I'm going to do is play it back and talk you through how to use it a little bit. All right. If you guys are aware with drums, how like when a drum is hit, there's a lot of energy in the signal right at the beginning. That's like the transient. Then there's kind of the energy diminishes over time, and that's kind of like what I'm going to use as to describe like the tail or the sustain of the drum hit. And what you can do with a compressor is by using a combination of the threshold and then attack and release, you can only have the compressor change the volume of specific parts of the drum hit. So you can set it up so that the compressor only changes the volume of the transient, or you can set it up that the compressor only changes the volume of the sustain. And I'll show you how to do that here. What I want to do is take a little bit off the transient of the drum hit. This is just a way to kind of squash it a little bit. You don't want to do it too much because you don't want to take the life away from the drums. But by doing it a little bit, it gets the transients under control, kind of even across multiple drum hits. I'm going to do that with a low ratio so that the compressor is not really turning down the volume too much above the threshold. And then a really fast attack, as fast as this compressor will allow, and kind of like a 10 millisecond release. What you want to do is adjust the threshold so that the compressor only turns on for that right at the beginning of the hit where the energy goes above the threshold. So here we go. I'll play it back and adjust that. I'm just doing a really small amount of gain reduction here. Not a whole lot. Just to tame the transient a little bit. That's all you really need. And what this is going to do is just change the level of the kick drum hits just at the beginning of the attack or the transient of the kick drum. The sustain isn't really being processed. You can see though that what's happening is kind of all the samples are leveling about the same. They're coming up to about the same level, so that's good. I'm going to boost up the output a little bit so that they're all coming up about this range right here. Perfect. So bypass, they're a little bit more all over the place. Some are quieter, some are louder. Now we're boosting them all up, taking a little bit off the attack. That's good. Next thing I'm going to do is actually another compressor. So you might be wondering, why are you just got done compressing. Why are you doing another compressor? This time I want the compressor to be changing the amplitude, the volume, the energy that's in the sustain or the tail of the drum hit. So I'm going to use a higher ratio, about 4:1, and set the same kind of threshold so that only the initial transient is going above the threshold, but then have a longer attack, even as much as I'll play around with it until I find it, and a longer release. And what that's going to do is decrease the volume in the sustain of the hit. So what I've done with this slower attack is allow the transient to pass through the compressor, but then have the compressor turn on and compress the tail and bring down the volume of that. If you want to be more dramatic with it, you can bring up another dynamics processor called a expander or gate, and that's really gonna bring down the tail of it. So I'm going to use a low ratio, so this is more of an expander. As I kick on, what you do is use the hold and release in conjunction with each other. You want it to sound natural. So I'm just doing a very small amount of gain reduction here. But hopefully that's going to tighten up the kick drum. You don't have to use it. These drum samples are already pretty dry as it is. This is just going to tighten it up a little bit more on your drum performance. Let me talk a little bit about EQing now. Kick drum, these samples have already been EQ'd a little bit, but if you really are looking to try and use these samples in like a kind of pop or rock song, you are going to need to do a little bit more EQing if you want to make them sit better and fit with that style of music. So I'm going to use just the stock EQ that comes with Pro Tools and talk you through a little bit here. First thing I usually always do with an EQ is sweep off the really low frequencies. That's by using a high pass filter. Just anything below 40 hertz or so, I think is just gonna it's not really gonna add much to your song, especially with the kick drum. You know, you can have some extra low rumbling going on, but that's not really where the meat of the kick drum sound is. It's more up around like 50, 60 hertz to about 100 hertz that you need to make sure there's energy in. Anything around 20 hertz is not really what the kick drum's all about. So the next thing I'm going to do is use this high shelf, bring it up, and if you use the Q, one thing that's cool is you can actually shape it like this, kind of add a little dip in over here. I'll bring it up. I'm not going to boost a whole lot, just a couple dB with the low shelf, and I can show you what that's doing here. Let me play it back. So I'm just boosting a little bit in the low end, thicken it up a little bit. But what I'm actually going to do now to really find the punch of the kick drum is to use instead of a shelf, I'm going to use an EQ band that has like a peak with a sharp Q right around 50, 60, 70 hertz. More dramatic. So now I'm starting to find where that root note really is thick on the kick drum. Down around 50 hertz or so. Gotta watch the output when you're boosting. So let's hear what I've done. That's what it was sounding like before. Now I'm just starting to thicken it up, add that low frequency to it. I'm going to cut here around a fair amount, around 250 hertz with a pretty wide Q actually. You know, these samples, it's very likely, I don't know what Tune Track actually did, but it's very likely that they had already cut around this frequency to kind of take the boxiness out of your kick drum sound. I think a boost around 2K to bring up that snap. Wide kind of. There it is. If you really want to add some extra air to it, throw in the high shelf. Alright, but I'd also recommend a low pass filter on this one, kind of like I was doing at the beginning, to make sure that it's not getting out of hand up there in the high frequencies. Alright, so let's hear what I've done. No EQ, thicken it up, tighten it, make it punch. So that's what I was working with before. Without doing a whole lot of work on it, here's what I've got with now. See how that sits in my mix. So I like that. I think that it's added something to the mix, makes the kick drum more dramatic and make it punch more. Let me show you another trick. And actually with the EQ, what I've done down here is kind of boosted up around 50 hertz with a very sharp Q. What that's doing is really accentuating that low frequency. This is kind of an old trick that people use. Tons of people have used it. If anything, it's almost cliche at this point. To do is to, what I'm going to do is set up and actually have like a tone getting triggered along with my kick drum. So this is going to be a really low frequency tone, around 50 hertz that I was boosting in the other boosting before. Let me make this a specific color so you can see. All right, I'm doing something fancy going on here. I'll call this my kick tone. All right, so what I'm going to do now is set up a send. Well, first I better set up my gate, expander gate. Alright, so what you need to do in Pro Tools is set up the signal generator plugin. It's under plugins, instrument. This is going to be really annoying for a second. Or actually, sorry, it's under other, signal generator. Let me turn my gate up, cut it off. Alright, let's get rid of this. Alright, so we're pulling that down. And actually what I want to do is quickly, I'll bring this up so you can hear what I'm doing. Bypass this. Is bring this down to low frequencies. Alright, now turn this back on. And I've got it cut off. So that's why I'm using the gate, is to control the tone. So what you'll do is you'll send a bus over here. I'll just call it bus 1 from the kick drum. Watch this. You set it up over here, bus 1 as well. So in your send, you bring up the level. This is going to send the level of the kick drum over to the gate. And the gate is now going to follow the kick drum instead of the tone generator. So let me solo these. Alright, so you have to set it up so the side chain is coming in. Don't want it to last for too long. Just add a little bit extra. Find the 70 hertz, too high. 50 hertz was what I was getting on the. Now you have to be careful. It could cause some like phase cancellation with your kick drum actually. So maybe I'll try 50. It's too high. Maybe around like 55. Or lower even. If you make this pre, now you can just hear what it sounds like, your tone that you're controlling. So this is like another layer that you're adding to your kick drum. Now you kind of have to mix it in for taste, so pull it out. Just thicken it up a little bit. And with our mix, this way you don't necessarily have to boost this so much. I'm boosting as much as like 6 dB. You can, and then mix this in. So that's one way that you can thicken up your kick drum. I've EQ'd it, I've compressed it, and now with the kick drum I've added this extra signal generator, blended it in. It's really beefing up the low end, giving it some more punch. You know, it's going to be more dramatic, especially if you've got nice studio speakers or anything like that. You'll be able to hear those low frequencies come out. If you're just using, you know, your iPod headphones, you might not even hear what's going on while I'm making the video. But it's good if you're going to be mixing your music for anything that, you know, any kind of speaker system that goes down around that 50 hertz range. So that's good. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how you can do similar kind of EQ and compression with your snare drums. This is my main snare thing I got going on here. So this snare sample's already pretty compressed. I'm just going to get them the same sort of thing I was doing before. Fast attack, fast release for the first compressor. Low ratio. Get the threshold now. So that's just adding a little bit of gain reduction. Get it under control. And you can, not too much extra gain. I'm going to copy and paste this now. Slow attack, slow release. On the next one, higher ratio. Bring out more of the attack. All right. Now, if you want to add the gate on this, similar sort of thing. This will tighten up your snare dramatically. You don't need a whole lot going on. Fast attack. Perfect. All right, same sort of thing. You can EQ, and I'll just do this snare. I'm not going to do the other ones. I'm just going to use a high pass filter here. This one you can even take up higher for your snare drum. You know, if you're mixing this with a full kit, like an acoustic kit, using that high pass filter is more important. Here, for the snare drum, it's more around 200-300 hertz range is the snare bottom end that you want to bring out. And usually I will cut a little bit, around 5 to 1,000 by using a high Q, find the frequency. that one. Pull it out. Add some more snap to it. Around 2K again. Add some air with the high shelf. Control the, make it too high. So this is the mix so far that we've got going on. You know, I think we've done a lot so far, above and beyond what you can do in Ezdrummer by mixing it out first with the duplicate copies of Ezdrummer, and then pulling different samples, instruments out of each one separately. What I want to do is talk quickly about overhead and room compression, and then also about some bus mixing, and that'll be the end. So I'm going to talk about overhead compression here, mixing the. So here's what we got. This is mostly the snare and the tom overhead. What you want to do is relatively slow attack, long release. You can use a higher ratio of the compressor. So you allow a little bit of that attack to go through, the transient to go through, but by bringing the threshold down, there's a lot more of the hits that are going to be compressed. Longer release keeps it going for a longer period of time. You can make it more dramatic by using a high ratio. Low ratio, not that dramatic. Makeup gain. I'm going to do a similar sort of thing, so I'll copy and paste it over here to the room. You can hear it. Alright, I like what that's doing. Let's see how the mix is going. Cool, so I like that. You know, if I want, I can copy and paste these kind of compressors over here on the other snare. Like what that's doing. Alright, now let me get into some bus mixing. This is a similar kind of bus processing that I've shown on other videos. What I'm actually going to do is create 3 auxiliary tracks. This first one I'm going to call clean. Second one I'm going to call comp. The last one I'm going to call bus. What I'm going to do here is what's called parallel compression. So what I'm going to do first is send the outputs, all the outputs here. If you highlight all of them and you shift option and click on the outputs, I'm going to change these all over to bus 3.4. Input of this to bus 3.4. You can actually rename it. Call that clean. Cool. So I got them all going through here. And I basically don't want to do any processing on this one. It's my compressor one. This is going to be parallel compression. I'm going to do a lot of compression on this one and mix it in. All right, so I'm going to call this one bus 56. I'll rename it to comp. It's my compressor send. Now I want to specifically pick things to go to the compressor that I want. I don't want a lot of my rooms and overheads going to my compressor. I just want mostly the snare, the kick drum, and the toms going. So let's go through, set up these sends, bus, comp. Bring this one up, set it as pre. I'm going to bring it across these ones right here. I will bring it over to my overhead, but I'm going to bring down the volume. All right, let's go over to my kick drum. All right, my kick drum I've got going here. Bring up the level. I don't want it on my kick tone. Actually, I will. I'll just bring it down a little bit. Send like this. All right, overhead and dry. Nope. All right, I've got it going here. This is my snare layer samples. And my overhead. That'll bring it down. So if I mute this, this is what I'm sending to my parallel compression channel. What I'm going to do is bring up the compressor. What I want to do is heavily compress this with a high ratio. Actually, a fast attack and a slow release. This is too much. In fact, I'm even going to take it out. I don't need it. So here you can see I'm getting a fair amount of gain reduction going on based on where I set the threshold. I'm even going to bring down the toms. I thought that was too much. Really squash it. You know, this isn't very usable. What it happens is if you mix it in with your dry, bring in that compressor, you start bringing your drums to life. That's just dry. Now they're starting to punch, they're starting to hit. What I like to do though is have both of these be controlled on a single fader here. So this is my bus fader. Let's make it bus 7/8. That way, once you get the balance going on that you like, you can control just the overall level of your drums with this fader. So this one is the bus send. And so now you have your single fader that controls your drum level that you set up. Just for good measure, I'll show you guys about limiting. So you have high ratio, but what you want is it to almost there to be no gain reduction, fast attack, fast release. You can watch and make sure you got your levels are going to be evened out. A little too much there. You can see I've got my threshold set about 4.6. I'm boosting the gain back up about 3 dB. Even boost it a little more. Now you've got your drums really loud, hitting pretty hard. The output level's under control. It's going to be really loud throughout the whole performance. What I'm going to do is just play it back, but at the same time, what I want to do is switch. I'm going to duplicate this one. Actually, what I'll do is duplicate everything but the insert. This is going to be my comparison. You can hear exactly what I've done and what you've got coming stock out of Ezdrummer. And I'll switch back between these so you can hear, what I've done. Oops, I don't want Easy Player. I want the Ezdrummer. All right, this is going to load. I'll play back, and you can hear what I've done to mix this, just using stock compressor, stock EQ. Once this loads, I'll switch over to it. So this is just this is what Ezdrummer sounds like when you load it up. You just use whatever mix preset they've got. Just the single samples. This, what you got. And I'll switch back and hear what drum mixing I've shown you has done. So it's true, mine's louder. I'll bring it down so you can more hear what the kind of EQ is different. But I think that, by showing you how you can bring it up louder using the limiter, compressors, and stuff like that, that's how it's going to sit in the mix. But just for the people that are saying, oh, it sounds better because it's louder, I'll play back by turning this one down and hearing it. With this also, if you want more snare, you want to bring out that ring. Bring up that ring if you want. And really change how it sounds. Bring down the other snare. All those things are possible. The way that I've got it set up, where you have different layers, you've got kick drum and cymbals, pretty dry in your mix. Not a lot of overheads with those. You got the kick, very dry, very punchy. Add that extra tone into it. You have the snare. You can bring up more room on the snare without, worrying about, is this just going to make my kick drum sound muddy and all that stuff like that. And my cymbals are going to wash now. But if you set up multiple instances of Ezdrummer, you can control all those things separately. With bus mixing, parallel compression is very popular. It's a way to make your drums really tight, really punch. So I recommend that. Throw a limiter on it. Keep it under control. That way when you're mixing it with other instruments, it's always going to be loud, and you can control it really easily with a single fader going up and down. So those are just basic tricks using the most simple plugins that come with Pro Tools right out of the bat. You know, if you have the factory bundle, you have things like the Bomb Factory 1176 that you could easily substitute those plugins. That compressor is, 1176 is very popular for mixing drums. I'd recommend substituting that if you've got that, or if you've got other libraries of drum samples or plugins. You know, those are going to be. I'd recommend using those that are more complex, have better algorithms going on behind the scenes for your EQs and your compressors. However, if this is all you got, you know, hopefully this video shows you some ways that you can use really inexpensive software. If you just, you're like, all right, I've just got Pro Tools, now what? Pick up Ezdrummer. It's really inexpensive. There's really no reason not to own it. Even if you have other drum libraries, like I have tons of other drum libraries from basically every other company that makes them. I like to, you know, try them all out, see which ones I like, mix and match for different songs. However, I always go back to Ezdrummer when I am tracking. So that is the reason I specifically own Ezdrummer, is I never use it while I'm mixing because I've got these other drum libraries. However, I always use it when I'm tracking. The reason for that is when you're tracking, you want to run your Pro Tools session at a really low latency or buffer setting. If you guys aren't familiar with that, I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about buffer setting. So in setup in the playback engine, you have a buffer setting. If you can change it, and what this does is it allows your computer to take in different numbers of samples and process them. When you're tracking, you want your computer to play back the sounds as fast as possible. So that's like using a low buffer setting. Because when you're tracking, if you've got latency and you're trying to play drums, you're trying to play another instrument, you're trying to talk, and your computer is recording the sound, but then taking 1,024 samples to play back what it's hearing, that's going to be a delay. You're going to hear that delay. You're not going to play in rhythm. If you're trying to play drums, you're not going to play things tight because you're going to be trying to play along with sounds that have occurred in time previously. So that's no good. What you want to do when you're tracking is use a really low buffer setting, as low as possible that your computer can handle. So if that's 64 samples, if that's 32 samples, by all means, make sure you're doing that. Because what's going to happen is your computer is going to be able to process the sound and then spit it out back to you through your headphones really fast. So at 32 samples, you know, that's a little bit of a delay, but it's not enough of a delay that's going to cause you to really play out of time. However, 1,024 samples, you're going to be able to hear that as a delay, and you're not going to play in time. So try and, when you're tracking, to use as low buffer setting as possible. When you're mixing and you set your buffer setting to higher number of samples, your computer is able to do a lot more processing when it is allowed to take in 1,024 samples at one time and process that, than having every 32 samples to have to do processing. So when you're mixing, switch back to 1024 and mix with this. You can run a lot more plugins, a lot more instruments without your computer having problems. When you're tracking though, don't use 1024 or 512. You're going to have problems making sure that your performance is in time. So that's all I want to say about the buffer setting. If you've got more questions about that, I'll try and answer them. Post your comments. You know, if you're not really familiar with it, it can be something that's a little bit confusing, but it really, by changing it around when you're recording and you're mixing, that will allow you to record your best and also mix your best. So make sure to pay attention to that. The reason why I bring it up is Ezdrummer is really light on the CPU. It doesn't take up a lot of memory. It also doesn't take up a lot of processing power. So if you're just running your Pro Tools session, no effects or anything like that at the beginning, and you're just recording either like on a keyboard, a drum performance, or like I have eDrums, and you're using those, I definitely recommend using Ezdrummer It doesn't sound great, but you can at least hear drums while you're recording. You can record at a really low buffer setting, as low as 32 samples with no problem. I was doing this on a 5 or 6 year old MacBook Pro for a long time before I got a different computer now that's faster, and that's the whole reason why I had Ezdrummer. If you're running a system that's older, definitely pick it up. It's really cheap and track with it. But then when you're mixing, it might not be the best sample library to use. Pick up something else if you've got the money. TuneTrack has other things like Superior Drummer, and then check out my other videos if you want to hear other companies and what they've got to offer, and use those for when you're mixing. That's all I really want to say. If you've got questions or comments, recommendations, suggestions, feel free to post comments, send me a message. I'd love to hear some other people's tips and tricks on how they just use simple plugins and Pro Tools, inexpensive software to mix. That's all I've got. Check out my other videos, guys, and take care.